Welcome to Sports Talk with RKJ. I'm your host, Steve Risser. Justin D'Onofrio and Kyle Galuli are not here this week. So we had a huge week in the National Football League with free agency and trades. And we're going to start with my team, the Giants, and Odell Beckham. And it was a blockbuster the Giants pulled off for Odell Beckham. They traded him to the Cleveland Browns. Olivier Vernon and with the Olivier Vernon trade earlier this week, that has now been combined with the Odell Beckham trade. Olivier Vernon and Odell Beckham for Jabril Peppers, a Kevin Zeitler, and a first and third round pick this year for the Giants. And this is a blockbuster. And for a Giant fan, it's kind of puzzling. And this all started with the Dave Gettleman era. And it all started when Dave Gettleman took over in 2017 after Eli Manning was benched. And the fan base could not stand it for Geno Smith. The Gettleman took over, and he tried he took over to rebuild a 3-13 team. He wanted to end up sticking with Eli Manning, which was a controversial decision at the time. He chose not to draft Sam Darnold. He went with Saquon Barkley, and he thought the Giants were in win now mode. But then you got to week 7 last year. They lost, and they ended up trading Snacks Harris and Eli Apple. They let Landon Collins walk, and now they've let Odell Beckham go, which was pretty much the unthinkable. As a Giants fan, you're still in shock. I mean, Odell Beckham, yeah, he's not Julio Jones, he's not DeAndre Hopkins, but he's still a top 3 receiver in the game, and you're still even though this has been rumored and talked about, you're still in shock that he is not a Giant anymore. And for the Giants, it's back to the drawing board. They're pretty much in rebuild mode. Yes, they did get Jabril Peppers, who's a piece on defense, and the number 17th pick, which has to be a defensive player. They have to take a defensive player with that pick. I think they're also going to take a quarterback with the number 6 pick. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the Giants do. Dave Gettleman's job is definitely going to be on the line to see what he does with these picks. I mean, it was a baffling move getting rid of Eli Manning, but a baffling move getting rid of Odell Beckham Jr., but it's definitely a move that Dave Gettleman, I felt like was going to make in the next couple of years. I just didn't think it was right now, and this could lead to a very, very difficult season for the New York Giants, and this shows you they're definitely in rebuilding mode with trading Odell Beckham, trading Olivier Vernon, and letting Landon Collins go. I mean, you lose a top 3 receiver and your 2 best defensive players. That is signaling you are definitely in rebuilding mode. And for the Browns, this could either be great or it could completely blow up. I mean, you look at the potential of this for the Cleveland Browns. You have a quarterback like Baker Mayfield. You got a top 3 receiver in Odell Beckham Jr. You got a top receiver now in Jarvis Landry. You got now you look at your defensive line. You just signed Sheldon Richardson in this deal. You got Olivier Vernon, you got Myles Garrett, so you have a really, really good defensive line. So the Browns on paper look like a really good team. And when was the last time we can remember the Browns being the favorite in the AFC North? You're looking at the Ravens losing 4 defensive starters. Even though they signed Earl Thomas, they lost 4 defensive starters. The Steelers lose Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. So it's very, very hard to remember the last time the Browns have been the favorite in the AFC North, but there is a very good chance the Browns are going to be the favorite in the AFC North going into the season. But there's also potential for the Browns this thing could blow up. You got a first-year coach in Freddie Kitchens. You have three very talented players in Baker Mayfield. We saw his talent last year. He took the Browns from 0-16 to 7-8-1. You see the talent of Jarvis Landry, and obviously we see the talent of Odell Beckham. But the problem is all 3 of them are immature, and if you get off to a slow start, this could very easily hurt this team. So for the Browns, it could either really help them, or it could really hurt them. They could implode, or it could really help them. And for the Giants, it's going to be a long rebuilding phase, and a move. And this is and we'll go back to the Giants. This is a move that a lot of fans cannot stand. And we'll go back to 2017 when that decision came with Eli Manning, and that's when yes, the Giants have had 5 losing seasons in the last 6 years, but this move, that move to bench Eli Manning really showed you the Giant ownership really started to lose its way. I mean, we remember John Mara signed off on it when it first happened. Then he backtracked because of all the backlash he got from the fans, and then he fires Jerry Reese. He fires Ben McAdoo. Eli becomes the starter for the next 4 games, but after that. But after Eli became the starter, they bring in Dave Gettleman, which I thought was a questionable move. I thought it was a very, very questionable move bringing in Dave Gettleman because you didn't want to bring in a guy that had just worked with Jerry Reese. I wanted to bring in Louis Riddick because I think why I didn't like the Gettleman hire was I thought he was very loyal to Eli. He was in the organization when Eli won those 2 Super Bowl rings. You bring Louis Riddick in, he probably moves on from Eli Manning, but Dave Gettleman being there when Eli won those 2 rings felt like he had loyalty to Eli Manning. Yes, he took Saquon Barkley with the number 2 pick, and Saquon Barkley is an excellent player, but you cannot equate a running back to a quarterback in this league in any shape, way, or form. And the problem there is the Giants right now just gave up probably gave up in the last year probably their top 3 defensive players, and now they don't have a quarterback for the future, which Dave Gettleman has to get this year with the number 6 pick. But it's just been a very, very, and I'm a Giants fan, it's been a very, very brutal time to be a Giants fan, and the news of trading Odell Beckham really capped the last 6 years of being a Giants fan. It's just been really, really painful. So another star receiver got traded this week, and that's Antonio Brown over to the Oakland Raiders. And this was a crushing blow for the Steelers because they only got a 3rd and a 5th round pick for him, and they also had to eat $21 million of dead money against their cap this year. So this is a devastating move for the Steelers. I mean, yes, he wanted out of there. Yes, he missed the Week 17 walkthrough before the Week 17 game against the Bengals. That was really, really costly for Antonio Brown there to skip that walkthrough because I think that was the end of his marriage with the Steelers. After that, I think at that point him and the Steelers were done, and they really were not going to move forward. And it looks like they parted ways, and now Antonio Brown's an Oakland Raider, and the Steelers stuck with $21 million in dead cap. You only got a 3rd and a 5th round pick. And looking at it from the Raiders side, this is a good pickup for the Raiders. It's really going to help Derek Carr, but doesn't make it that much better because this Raiders team has a bunch of holes which they're going to have to fill in the draft. They have 3 first-round picks. They got one of them for Amari Cooper last year. They got one of them getting rid of Khalil Mack. So this move could really, really help the Oakland Raiders. This move could help the Oakland Raiders, and then they could really focus on their defense in the draft. I thought they got 3 free agents. I thought they overpaid for all of them. I thought 4 years, $44 million for Terrell Williams is too much. I thought he was a receiver that benefited from having Phillip Rivers last year. I thought LaMarcus Joyner's 4 years, $41 million is too much. I think he's an overrated safety who cashed in free agency. And the move I really, really think they really overpaid for. I know Colton Miller was a complete disaster. Their number 1 pick was a complete disaster at left tackle last year, but I think they really overpaid for Trent Brown. Yes, Trent Brown had 2 great games with the Patriots. He had a great game in the AFC division, in the divisional round of the playoffs against the Chargers. He had a great game against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. But he got that money off 2 games, $16.5 million a year for Trent Brown. I think it's completely ridiculous. I think he's completely overpaid. Pro Football Focus had him ranked as the 32nd for tackles last year. I think he's now the highest paid tackle in the game. I think he's completely overpaid. The Raiders were desperate at the position because Donald Penn was aging. They looked like they might have whiffed on Colton Miller. He was terrible at left tackle last year. So I think the Raiders definitely overpaid at that position. But they needed a left tackle, and they have one now. And then the Raiders are looking to rebuild their roster. For the Steelers, I still think it's a team that could compete for the AFC North next year. But you look at their roster right now. Big Ben's not getting any younger. They still have Juju, who's pretty good. They still have James Conner, who's good, but he's no Le'Veon Bell. And their defense is a good defense, but it's not a great defense. So the Steelers didn't really get the return they wanted for Antonio Brown. The Raiders get him. Makes the Raiders probably a little bit better. The Steelers, we'll see what ends up happening there. It's going to be interesting there. But we got the 2 superstar receivers traded, OBJ to the Browns. He goes to the AFC North, and Antonio Brown leaves the AFC North and goes to the Oakland Raiders. So we head into free agency, and we talk about a team, the other New York team, who really cashed in big in free agency, and that's the New York Jets. They sign C.J. Mosley to a They signed C.J. Mosley to a 5-year, $81 million deal with $51 million of it guaranteed. This is a really, really good pick for the. This is a great pickup for the New York Jets. I mean, he's one of the best linebackers, and he's one of the top linebackers in the league. I don't really know why the Ravens end up letting him walk. I think this is, out of all the guys the Ravens lost in free agency, losing Eric Weddle, losing Zadarius Smith, losing Terrell Suggs, I think this is the biggest loss the Ravens are going to suffer in free agency. I just think that the Ravens, losing 4 defensive starters, this one's the biggest. He's a really good player. He's been a Pro Bowler a couple of times. He's had over 100 tackles. I think he's really going to help the Jets defense. You put him on that Jets defense with Jamal Adams, with Leonard Williams, with Henry Anderson, who they just re-signed to a 3-year, $25 million deal. I think the Ravens are going to be the Ravens are going to really miss C.J. Mosley. I think the Jets, I really like these pickups in free agency. I love Mosley. I'm a little bit 50-50 on Le'Veon Bell because, yes, he hasn't played a year, and I heard rumors he gained over 30 pounds. So for that kind of money, for signing him to a 4-year, $52.5 million deal, paying him about $13 million a year, I don't know. For a running back that could potentially be out of shape, that could be very, very risky for the Jets going forward. But you want a top-level skill guy that could help Sam Darnold, and this is a guy that, if he is the player he was in Pittsburgh, is really, really going to help Sam Darnold. You look at Sam Darnold last year, he really didn't have a ton of weapons on his offense. Yes, his running game worked a little bit with in the beginning of the season with Isaiah Crowell and Bilal Powell, but neither of those guys are Le'Veon Bell, and neither of those guys can carry an offense like Le'Veon Bell when he's on top of his game. Le'Veon Bell is one of the top players in the game when he is on top of his game, and one of the top running backs in the game when he's on top of his game. And I think that this move, if it pans out for the Jets, is really, really going to help Sam Darnold and that offense. And it looks like the Jets, when Tom Brady retires, look like the favorite, the team in the AFC East, because you got a young quarterback, you potentially could have a stud running back, you got a defense that potentially could be really, really good, adding C.J. Mosley, having a stud like Jamal Adams, having a good players like Leonard Williams and Henry Anderson, and don't forget, Avery Williamson had a pretty good year, 2 last year on that defense. So I think the Jets made some pretty good additions. They made some pretty good additions in free agency. And I think they definitely, with those additions, with that young quarterback, very easily could be competing for the postseason next year. So we'll talk about a linebacker the Jets thought they had in free agency on a Monday night. They thought they had Anthony Barr, but at the last minute, he ends up signing with the Vikings to a 5-year, $67.5 million deal. And for the Vikings, this keeps their kind of now, even though they lost Sheldon Richardson, kind of still keeps that defense intact. You got Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter on the edges. You got Eric Kendricks and now Anthony Barr is your middle linebackers, and now you still got Xavier Rhodes and Harrison Smith in that secondary, even though Andrew Zendeo got released this week. So this definitely keeps that Viking defense intact. And I think for the Vikings, this could be one of their. This could be a really good signing, and they could rebuild that, and they could really have that defense. And that defense played at a high level the last couple of years. It could absolutely continue to play at that level. That Viking defense could definitely play at that level. So we'll see what ends up happening there. The problem with the Vikings is they got to get Kirk Cousins to win that big game. That's the biggest key to the Minnesota Vikings, because last year, we all remember, I mean, he was 2 of the last 3 years. When he was with the Redskins, he lost that Week 17 game against the Giants. When he was with the Vikings last year, he lost that Week 17 game to the Bears. So we'll see what ends up happening there with We'll see what ends up happening there with the Vikings, Kirk Cousins, and Anthony Barr. So Anthony Barr heading back to Minnesota. We have a big move with the Patriots. The Patriots had a big with the team in their division, the Lions. The Patriots had a big loss. They lost Trey Flowers. He got a 5-year, $90 million deal with $51 million guaranteed from the Lions. I think obviously this is going to improve that Lion defense. You pair him with Snacks Harrison. I think Trey Flowers, yes, he's a really good player. He can get pressure on the quarterback. He can stop the run. But obviously the issue with Trey Flowers is the issue with Trey Flowers is his sack numbers are not that high. He only had 7.5 sacks, and I think that's why the Patriots were leery of giving him that big contract. Were leery of giving that big deal. I think they ended up saving money trading for Michael Bennett. Even though Bennett's not as good of a player as Trey Flowers, he was really productive getting to the quarterback. I think he had like 9 sacks last year. He had more sacks than Trey Flowers, but Trey Flowers is the better player, but for lesser value, for like $7 million a year. The Pats decided to go that route and sign Michael Bennett, and the Lions get Trey Flowers. The Lions are getting a really good player. He reunites with Matt Patricia, who was the defensive coordinator in Detroit when Trey Flowers was there. So you kind of had a feeling Flowers would either go to Miami or Detroit, reunite with Brian Flores, or reunite with Matt Patricia. So you kind of knew Trey Flowers was going to kind of have that reunion either in Detroit or in Miami. So we'll move on to a quarterback who was the Super Bowl MVP of Super Bowl 51, Nick Foles, and he has found his team. He is heading to Jacksonville on a 4-year, $88 million deal. And if you look at Jacksonville's roster, is Nick Foles going to be the guy to bring the Jaguars and to get the Jaguars on top of the AFC North like they were in 2017? I say no, because I still think the weapons on offense are not as good as what he had in Philadelphia. He doesn't have any receiver as good as Alshon Jeffrey. He doesn't have the same offensive line that he had in Philadelphia. He doesn't have as good of an offensive line in Philly, or a receiver as good as Jeffrey, or a tight end as good as Ertz. I still think, though, the Jaguars will be in playoff contention this year. Because they won't be 5-11. They'll definitely improve with Nick Foles, because Nick Foles is definitely an upgrade over Blake Bortles. But it's a lot of money for a guy that you're not totally sure could take you to the playoffs. We all saw Nick Foles. It's going to be interesting to see what Nick Foles shows up. Will it be the Nick Foles the first 2 years in Philly? Will it be the Nick Foles when he went to St. Louis and was absolutely terrible in 2015? Or will it be the Nick Foles that got that shot after Carson Wentz got hurt in 2017 and brought the Eagles to a championship, and last year when he got the shot and took the Eagles to the divisional round against the Saints? So we'll see it's going to be interesting to see what Nick Foles the Jaguars are going to get. But I think they're going to get a guy, kind of a combination of both. A guy that is going to make plays. He was really good under pressure last year. Had one of the highest quarterback ratings under pressure of any quarterback in the postseason. So it should be interesting to see, but I just think the issue with the Jaguars is their lack of weapons on the perimeter, and I think Fournette is injury prone, and their offensive line, which did have injuries last year. They lost Brandon Linder, they lost Cam Robinson, they lost Andrew Norwell, so they lost a good amount of offensive linemen last year. So we'll see if that line can stay intact a little bit. And we'll see if Nick Foles can make some of the Jags skill players a little bit better. But I still think 8-8, 9-7 for the Jags after they signed Nick Foles. So we got a bunch of safeties who just came off the board, and we'll start with Earl Thomas signed a 4-year, $55 million deal with the Ravens. We got Eric Weddle, a 2-year, $12.5 million deal with the Rams. Landon Collins signed a monster deal with the Redskins, 6 years, $84 million. And you got Tyrann Mathieu signed a 4-year, $24 million deal. 3-year, $42 million deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll start with Eric Weddle. I think this decision is strictly on winning. He's not worried about the money he's making. He wants to win. He wants his team to. He wants to win. He wants to win a championship. He's been in this league 10 years with the Chargers. Over. I think he's been in this league 12 years with the Chargers and with the Ravens. He wants to win. That's what Eric Weddle wants to do, and that's why he signed this short deal with the Rams after he was cut by the Ravens. I think this is definitely going to help the Rams defense. It's going to give them leadership that they need. I mean, because they just lost LaMarcus Joyner in free agency, and I wouldn't have paid LaMarcus Joyner that much money. I even think right now Eric Weddle's an upgrade over LaMarcus Joyner. So I think this move is definitely going to help the Rams. You got Earl Thomas going to the Ravens, 4 years, $55 million. A lot of teams were worried about paying this guy a lot of money at his. I mean, let's listen. In this decade, Earl Thomas has been probably the best safety. Since Ed Reed's retired, he's probably been the best safety, the most consistent safety I've seen. I mean, he's been a great player for the Seattle Seahawks. He's pretty much he's been a great center fielder, a really good free safety. But the last 2 injuries he's had have caused teams to have concerns about Earl Thomas. The Ravens do sign him. He did get his money, got his 4-year, $55 million deal from the Ravens. I think this move, looking at what happened to the Ravens, losing 4 defensives, losing C.J. Mosley, losing Zadarius Smith, losing Terrell Suggs, and losing Eric Weddle. This could be an upgrade over Eric Weddle, but it also could be a downgrade if Earl Thomas is not the player he used to be. And it's a lot of money. It'd be a lot of money, and it could be a big mistake if he's not the player he used to be. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see what kind of player Earl Thomas still is. Is he still that top safety, or has he regressed since the 2 knee injuries he's had? So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to Earl Thomas when he goes to Baltimore. We have a huge deal for Landon Collins. The Redskins signed him to a 6-year, $84 million deal with I think it's $45 million guaranteed, which is a monster contract for Landon Collins. I mean, he is a good player. I'm a Giants fan. I watched Landon Collins the last 4 years. He is a really, really good safety, but he is not great in coverage, and that's a big reason why Dave Gettleman did not give him the franchise tag for $11 million. He's not great in coverage. You saw when they played the 49ers, George Kittle definitely had his way with him. Zach Ertz had his way with them when they played the Eagles. So he really could tackle. He's one of the best he's probably the best tackling safety in the NFL, and that's a big reason why he got paid. The Redskins paid him all that money. But as a result of this, though, for the Redskins, they had to release a pretty good linebacker, Zach Brown, and because they had to pay all that money to Landon Collins. So it is a risky move for the Redskins to pay Collins all that money. I don't think he's worth all that money, but at his age, and he's a good player at the position, sometimes a team's going to throw all that money out at him, and the Redskins did. And this is kind of a kick in the teeth for the Giants because they let him walk, and they lose OBJ, and they lose Vernon, and now Landon Collins is in the division. That's going to be really, really hard for a Giants fan to take, now having to watch Landon Collins play in the NFC East. So the Kansas City Chiefs signed Tyrann Mathieu to a 3-year, $42 million deal. And the problem with the Chiefs, though, is their defense is really hurting after trading D Ford to the 49ers for a number 2 for a second round pick for a second round pick in 2020, and they also released Justin Houston. So their defense is really hurting. Really, their only pass rusher they have right now is the only pass rusher they have right now is Chris Jones. So their defense is really, really hurting right now for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think that's a big reason when you look at them versus a team like the New England Patriots, versus a team like the Indianapolis Colts. They're definitely going to have the worst defense between all those 3 teams going into next year. I mean, the Colts really improved defensively, getting Darius Leonard. D'Amico Autry had a good year. Their defense was not great, but it was good. The Patriots, obviously, when you have Bill Belichick over there, they did lose Trey Flowers, but you're still going to have a pretty good defense over up in New England. So this is a huge loss. This is huge. It's going to be huge to lose these 2 guys, D Ford and Justin Houston, and try to replace them. And you just got to hope. And their offense is really, really good. They're going to be playing a lot of shootouts. I think a big reason why they traded D Ford is they want to give Tyreek Hill the big money, and they want to pay Patrick Mahomes eventually. So yes, Kansas City did trade both, did get rid of Houston and Ford, but they got Tyrann Mathieu back in return. And Tyrann Mathieu, he isn't the safety he once was in Arizona, but he still can tackle. He's still a pretty good safety in this league, but the Kansas City's defense is still definitely going to be hurting with those moves. So the Packers were a little bit busy in free agency. The Green Bay Packers, when Ted Thompson was the GM, really did not get into free agency. They didn't really get into free agency that much. But since Ted Thompson has left, Green Bay has really, really started to get more and more into free agency. And last year they signed Muhammad Wilkerson and Jimmy Graham, and they got Jimmy Graham. Both those didn't work out. But here they got a couple guys that fit that scheme that Mike Penton wants to run. They got a couple 3-4 outside linebackers. They signed Preston Smith to a 5-year, $52 million deal. Guy who can get pressure, doesn't get a lot of sacks, but he did get pressure on that defensive line in Washington with Ryan Kerrigan. They also signed Zadarius Smith to a 4-year, $66 million deal. He led the Ravens in sacks last year with 8.5. He has some potential to be a pretty good player. He might be their best free agent they signed. And they also signed Adrian Amos, who's had a couple pretty good years with Chicago. I mean, yeah, he's not the player Eddie Jackson is. He's not the player Khalil Mack is. So that's why the Bears passed on him, because eventually the Bears are going to have to pay Mitchell Trubisky. They're going to have to pay Eddie Jackson. And they might even have to pay Tack Cohen too. So that's I think why the Bears passed on, ended up just letting Adrian Amos go. But he's definitely going to help that Packer defense too. And you look at the Packers with the new head coach Matt LaFleur, and their offense I think will be definitely be better, more creative than it's been the last couple of years with Mike McCarthy. And now you got a couple defensive guys who are, 3 aren't great players, but they're guys that fit Mike Pettin's that 3-4 scheme of Mike Pettin. And I think they're 3 guys that could help the Packers. And all the Packers need is a competent defense to support their offense. And if that happens, you have Aaron Rodgers, you have a pretty good offensive line, you have Devontae Adams. They're going to need a running game. Aaron Jones did a decent job last year, but they definitely need a running game. But I think that these moves help their defense and could help the Packers be a Super Bowl contender next year. The Eagles had a very, very interesting offseason. As we saw, they traded Michael Bennett to the Patriots. They did not sign Jordan Hicks. They sent him to Arizona. He signed a 4-year, $36 million deal with the Arizona Cardinals. I think the biggest thing with Jordan Hicks, he just couldn't stay healthy. He just couldn't stay on the field. And Philadelphia didn't want to make a long-term commitment to Jordan Hicks. Good player, but he just couldn't stay on the field. And I think the Eagles just did not want to make a long-term commitment to Jordan Hicks. And then you look at some of the moves they did make. They signed Malik Jackson to add depth to that defensive line. He's going to add depth to that defensive tackle position. They signed Jason Peters, which I don't think made that much sense because he did have a bad year last year, but they still want to keep their offensive line intact, so they signed Jason Peters. They also traded for Deshaun Jackson, who wanted out of Tampa Bay, and they didn't get much for him either. They got a 6th-round pick for Deshaun Jackson, so that could end up winding up being a steal because you look at the Eagles' offense. They got Alshon Jeffrey. Can Alshon Jeffrey and Carson Wentz get on the same page? And then you got Deshaun Jackson, who could still be a deep threat. Yes, in Tampa, he struggled because the quarterback situation was a mess. It was a total mess last year between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston. He'll now have a stable quarterback situation. He's been in Philly before. I think he's excited to play there. And I think he potentially could help the Eagles. Definitely could help that offense, make them more explosive next year. So, I mean, the Eagles making some interesting moves. Also, a team that's making some moves is the Tennessee Titans. They had some cap space to spend, and they got some pretty good players. They got Adam Humphries, who's an underrated receiver. I think he's going to help Mariota in the slot. I think they signed him to a 4-year, $36 million deal to the Titans. So that's $9 million a year for Adam Humphries. They also signed, I think their best signing was Roger Stafford. And this offensive line for Tennessee is could be really good next year. You got the 2 tackles with Taylor Lewan and Jack Conlon, and now you got that guard inside with Roger Stafford, and that's going to be a loss for the Rams, especially a quarterback that has trouble under pressure, Jared Goff. Roger Stafford was a pretty good guard for the Rams the last 2 years, and he's really going to help the Titans in that offensive line. So it's definitely going to be, I think the Titans' offensive line has improved. They got a receiver, and now Mariota's really got to step up. He's playing on that 5th-year option this year, and if he wants to get a big-time, a long-term deal, he's got to really, really step up for them this year. This is the year where Marcus Mariota really has to step up for the Tennessee Titans. We look at the Denver Broncos. They made some moves in free agency. Obviously, they went out and got Joe Flacco. They also went out and signed Kareem Jackson to a 3-year, $33 million deal. I think once they lost Akeem Talib last year to the Rams, they needed another corner to take that spot. And I think that Talib can Jackson could really take that spot. He won't be as good as Talib, but he could definitely solidify them at corner with him and Chris Harris. And obviously they have Joe Flacco, and they also signed Jawan James to play right tackle. And I think that definitely, now that you've lost Matt Paradis to the Panthers, you definitely have a right tackle now who can play. You bookend him with Garrett Bowles, who needs to step up. He needs to step up at the left tackle position. But you put those two tackles together, and you give Joe Flacco protection. That team could potentially, I think they're an 8-8 team, but they could compete for the playoffs because they did upgrade a little bit at quarterback there, and now their defense getting a little bit better. So that was a good move. That was a pretty good move for the Denver Broncos. The Houston Texans upgraded their secondary a little bit. I wish they upgraded their offensive line because that's what needs to be upgraded. If the Houston wants to compete with the big boys in the AFC, the Colts, the Colts, the Patriots, and the Chiefs, they got to improve that offensive line. That offensive line was absolutely terrible last year, but they got some guys in the secondary because they lost Tyrann Mathieu and Kareem Jackson, and they replaced them with Tashawn Gibson, and they signed Bradley Roby to a 1-year, $10 million deal. So they improved the secondary, but they really need to improve that offensive line they need to improve that offensive line during the draft. The Buffalo Bills added a couple weapons for Josh Allen. They went out and got Cole Beasley, signed him to a 4-year, $29 million deal. The Bills also signed John Brown to I think it was a 3-year, $27 million deal. I think John Brown could be a good fit. He was, beginning of the year with Joe Flacco, a good fit until the Ravens changed the way they played and started running the ball. I think that Josh Allen, with Josh Allen's arm and the speed of John Brown, he could run those go routes. He could really be very, very effective for the Buffalo. He could be effective for the Buffalo Bills. I think Cole Beasley could be a really good slot receiver for Josh Allen too. So you definitely like those moves. The Bills also signed Mitch Morse to improve their offensive line. Kind of overpaid for him, but they needed to improve. They definitely needed to improve on the offensive line. So that's why they made that deal. So we'll talk about one more free agent. We'll talk a little bit what the Niners did in free agency. They went out and I think completely overpaid for Quan Alexander. I think they gave him a 4-year, $52 million deal. I think they completely overpaid for him. I think he's a linebacker coming off an ACL injury. He's a middle linebacker that's not that good. I think they had a lot of cap space to spend. They were desperate at the middle linebacker position because they had to release Reuben Foster. So I think that they overpaid there at that position. But I like their move. One move I really liked, I like them getting Tevin Coleman because now they could have a really good, if Jerick McKinnon can stay healthy, and they got Jerick McKinnon, Matt Breida, and Tevin Coleman. They could run the ball. That's a team that with any team with the Shanahans, one thing they can do is they can always run the ball, and I think that's really, really something that could help the 49ers offense open things up for George Kittle, open things up for Jimmy Garoppolo. They got a pretty good offensive line with 2 tackles with Joe Staley and Matt McClinchy, who they drafted in the first round last year. So I didn't mind them going out and getting Tevin Coleman. We'll talk a little bit about the Cardinals. Terrell Suggs went there, 1 year, $7 million. We also signed Jordan Hicks, and they also lost Dale Buchanan to free agency. He went to Tampa Bay on a 1-year deal. So we'll talk about some of the free agents who have not been signed yet. We'll look at some of the top ones who haven't been signed, and we'll start with Golden Tate who played for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Detroit Lions last year. And I think a big reason Golden Tate hasn't been signed is he just wasn't that effective when he was with the Eagles last year. Yes, he made that big catch in the playoff game, but knowing what he probably wants, maybe 12 million a year, I don't think a team wants to give it to him. He's 30 years old. He's been productive in the league with the Seahawks, with the Lions, and last year he had that big catch with the Eagles and that game-winning touchdown against the Bears in the playoff game. He's been productive, but I just don't think he's getting what he wants, and he might have to sign for like a 1-year deal now. We'll see what ends happening to Golden Tate, but even though there hasn't been a strong receiver class, Golden Tate is not getting the money I think he's seeking. I think that's a big reason why Golden Tate has remained unsigned for this team, for the Eagles. Also, KJ Wright was unsigned with the Seahawks. He ended up re-signing with the Seahawks yesterday, so they keep their linebacking core of Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright. They keep that linebacking core intact. We'll also talk about another free agent who hasn't been signed. That's Ndamukong Suh. Here's the problem with Ndamukong Suh. Ever since he left Detroit, where he was a beast. He was one of the best, probably the best defensive tackle in football when he was in Detroit. But the problem with Ndamukong Suh, since he went to Miami, he was still really good, but he wasn't as good. And last year, his season was weird. He kind of took the regular season off and really pretty much turned it on in the playoffs. And the problem is a lot of these teams don't be paying top dollar for a guy who's just going to turn it on in the playoffs. You got to be good all throughout the year if you're going to get a big time contract. And that's why Ndamukong Suh is sitting there, really not getting a contract. And it's tough to find a team right now. You still got a team like the Colts with a lot of cap space, but Frank Wright is trying to change a culture there, and he does not want guys like Ndamukong Suh in his locker room. He does not want that. I mean, he just doesn't want that, and it's going to be tough. I mean, obviously, Suh's going to sign with the team. But let me remember last year in free agency when the Dolphins cut him. It took forever to sign him, and then Suh ended up taking a one-year deal with the Rams because the Rams were loading up on a lot of guys with one-year deals last year to try to get to the Super Bowl, and they did. But again, Suh's in free agency again, having trouble finding a team, not being a day one free agent. He's having trouble finding a team, and a big reason for that is he's been lazy over the last couple of years. Let's just say how it is. He's been lazy, and he's not been playing at that level that he played in Detroit or the level he played at times in Miami. So I think that's a big reason why Suh has not been re-signed. Another free agent that hasn't been who was just released and who hasn't been re-signed is Justin Houston. And the problem with Justin Houston is he's missed over 20 games in the last. He had that huge season in 2014 where he had 22 sacks. He was a beast. But the problem with Justin Houston is he hasn't been he hasn't been the player that he's been since 2014 due to injuries. He's missed over 20 games in the last two seasons, and when that ends up over 20 games over the last 5 seasons, and when that ends up happening, it's tough for teams to pay top value for this. The Chiefs gave him all that money after that 2014 season, and they had to end up releasing him because you don't want to spend all that money on a player that's just not on the field and not healthy. I mean, the best availability in football is your availability, and he just has not been available for the Kansas City Chiefs. Another free agent that hasn't been signed yet is Ziggy Ansah. And Ziggy Ansah, when he's on the field, has been pretty good for the Lions. But I think the big reason the Lions didn't want to re-sign him is he missed over half the season last year. It's going to be weird to see where he goes. I think there's a pretty good chance that Ziggy Ansah could end up going to the Colts. I think he goes to the Colts in like a 1 year, maybe like a 1 year. Even like an $11 or $12 million deal because the Colts have a lot of cap space to spend. I think he could be one of those pass rushers in their defense he's one of those guys who could get to the quarterback for the Colts and could help that defense. He could help the Colts get to where they need to get to. He could help that Colts defense get to where he gets to. I wouldn't be surprised if a team like the Colts didn't sign him. Also, another player in free agency who's an offensive tackle is Darrell Williams, who hasn't been signed. And I've heard rumors the Giants and the Bills have been in on Darrell Williams. And the problem with Darrell Williams is he's a right tackle. He's not a left tackle, so he's not going to get as big of money. I mean, Juwan James did. I think he's a little bit younger than Darrell Williams. That's probably why he got all that money. And Juwan James was a first-round pick I think 3 or 4 years ago. I think that's why Juwan James got all that money. So Darrell Williams hasn't been signed. You could look at the Bills. I think he'll probably end up going to the Bills because the Bills still have a lot of cap space, even though they really haven't spent huge on a free agent outside of Mitch Morse. So I think that I could see Darrell Williams going to the Bills. You also have Zach Brown out there who just got cut by the Redskins. And here's the deal with the Redskins: they have Alex Smith's contract on the books, which he may never even play again. Yes, you're getting kind of a bargain for Case Keenum. Trading for Case Keenum, you're getting kind of a bargain. You just signed Adrian Peterson to a 2-year, $8 million deal. Adrian Peterson was probably your best skill guy last year. I mean, yes, he's not the Adrian Peterson of old, but he still had a really, really good year last year for the Redskins. And now you pay all this money to Landon Collins. You're going to have to make some sacrifices, and they're going to have to get rid of Zach. They're going to have to get rid of Zach Brown. And I wouldn't mind to seeing the Giants sign one of these free agents if it is a Justin Houston, if it is a Ziggy Ansah, if it is a Zach Brown, because not cutting Eli, which I think they should do at this point because they already got rid of OBJ. Why keep Eli? But I think, defensively, Justin Houston would fit the scheme, even though he can't stay healthy. Zeke Janssen would give him a pass rusher, and Zach Brown would give him a linebacker. So I wouldn't mind the Giants signing one of those guys, but we'll see. And maybe Gettleman doesn't want to build through free agency. He wants to build through the draft with guys like B.J. Hill and guys like Lorenzo Carter, and whatever pick he gets in the first round this year, and guys like Dalvin Thomas and younger guys like B.J. Hill and Lorenzo Carter, who he brought here. So it's going to be interesting to see what Gettleman ends up doing. But I wouldn't mind, as a Giants fan, seeing those other three guys signed. And one other thing we didn't get to was Mark Ingram signed a $3 or $15 million deal with the Ravens. Here's my take on this. I think the Ravens want to be a run-first team. I think they're committed to that. And I think that bringing in Ingram makes that happen. I think bringing him and Gus Edwards in there, the Ravens could run the ball really, really well. The problem's going to be is have teams caught up to that offense that the Ravens have been running. That's the thing. If they did that, because neither running back's a great running back, but as a combination, they could be a pretty good combination for the Ravens. So that should be interesting what happens there. And taking Ingram away from the Saints is going to be bigger than you think, because Ingram and Kamara were a really good tandem. When Ingram was alone, he was not a great running back. The Saints didn't have a great running game. But when you put the two of them together, you put Ingram and Kamara together, that kind of, because remember the Saints, they went 7-9 3 years in a row. Didn't have a great running game, had a really bad defense. And I think they kind of found an identity in 2017 by running the ball. It helped their defense. It protected their defense. It didn't make their defense as bad. And I think that losing Ingram could be definitely a loss in the Saints offense. Drew Brees getting a little bit older, and you look at Alvin Kamara the first three games. Yeah, you had that big game against the Giants in Week 4, but you look at the first 3 games of the season for Alvin Kamara. He did not run well between the tackles. He has not proven right now that he can run well between the tackles consistently. And can be an every down back. Yes, Kamara is a great receiver. He's pretty much like a slot receiver. He's a great slot receiver, but he hasn't proven that he could run between the tackles consistently. And I think that's something that could be a real concern on the Saints offense next year. Losing Mark Ingram and having Kamara be the guy on that offense, be that main running back in that offense. Because Kamara, even though he's as great as he's been as a slot receiver, he has not proven he could be that every down back on the Saints offense. Talk about a couple quarterbacks, a couple free agent quarterbacks, veteran free agent quarterbacks who got signed. Tyrod Taylor went to the Chargers on a 2-year deal. I think that makes sense. A lot of people thought he was going to go to Miami. But if you look at the way what Miami's doing, they got rid of Cameron Wake. He went to the Titans. They signed Devontae Parker. They got rid of Adam Gase. Miami, I think they're in a way trying to tank try to get Tua Tagovailoa. They're trying to tank for 2020, and it doesn't seem like they really have that great of a plan at quarterback right now. They've had Teddy Bridgewater in for a visit, but a lot of people are thinking he's going to re-sign with the Saints. So Taylor goes to the Chargers on a 2-year deal, and Teddy Bridgewater looks like he's going to re-sign with the Saints, but did meet with Miami. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Does Miami end up just keeping Tannehill this season, or do they end up signing Teddy Bridgewater? So it's going to be very interesting to see what Miami ends up doing at the quarterback position this year. It looks like Miami's looking towards 2020 and looking like this is kind of a lost season for the Dolphins. So we'll talk about one more free agent. That's Clinton Dix, one of the safeties that's out there on the market. He's been kind of all over the place. He played pretty well in Green Bay, went to Washington, wasn't as good. He's still a safety out there on the market. They see that a team traded him, so I think he's one of those last safeties on the market. And a lot of teams that he probably wants a lot of money, but you've seen all the safeties that have been out there have gotten a lot of money. Earl Thomas, Landon Collins, Landon Collins, Tyrann Mathieu, Eric Weddle. So he's like the 5th, 6th, even LaMarcus Joyner. He's like the 5th, 6th, like the 6th or 7th safety, and that's why I think that's why Clinton Dix is still out there, and I think that's why he's not making a ton of money. So with March Madness being a week away, we are going to shift our attention to college basketball, and we look at the number 1 seeds right now in college basketball. You look at Virginia right now. I don't care what Virginia does in the ACC tournament. They should be the overall number 1 seed in this tournament. You got 2 outstanding players in DeAndre Hunter and Kyle Guy. Good point guard and Ty Jerome. I think Virginia, yes, their 2 losses were to Duke with Zion Williamson. So I think Virginia should be the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. I think that I still think the interesting thing with Virginia is what are they going to end up doing when they get that number 1 seed? What are they going to end up doing? Because we remember what happened last year. They lost to UMBC. They were eliminated in the first round. The first time ever a 16 seed beat a 1 seed. Gonzaga, I still think they're a 1 seed, even though they lost to St. Mary's. They have a really, really good team, a couple really good bigs inside. Even though they play in the West Coast Conference, I still think Gonzaga is a number 1 seed. North Carolina, they have as a number 1 seed right now. But I think if Duke beats them in the semifinals Friday night, I think I would take Duke over them as a number 1 seed. I think Duke would overtake them as a number 1 seed because 2 of the times North Carolina beat Duke was without Zion Williamson. Yeah, don't get me wrong. North Carolina is a really good team too. I mean, you got Kobe White, who's really stepped up as a freshman. You got Cameron Johnson. You got Tyler May inside. You got Martin. I mean, you got Luke May inside. I mean, you have a really good team in North Carolina. But say Duke beats them in the ACC semifinals on Friday night, I think Duke should leap over them as a 1 seed instead of North Carolina, because you look at 3 of the 5 losses for Duke were without Zion Williamson, and 2 of North Carolina's wins against Duke were without Zion Williamson. If you look at some of North Carolina's losses too, they lost by over 20 points to Louisville, who they played tonight in the ACC tournament, and they lost to Texas earlier in the year too. And we look at the 4th number 1 seed, Kentucky. Them at 26-5 right now. Tennessee at 27-4. I think if Tennessee beats them and wins the SEC tournament, I think Tennessee should be a 1 seed. I think the winner, if they play in the semifinals on Saturday, Tennessee and Kentucky, I think the winner of that Tennessee-Kentucky game should get a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So I think one of those teams should end up getting the number 1 seed. So we're going to look at some of the bubble teams, and we got some big games coming up right now in about 2 minutes. You got Florida against Alabama. That's a really big game. I think if Florida wins this game, they get into the tournament. If Alabama gets it, doesn't win the game, they end up losing. I mean, the 4 teams who are Joe Lunardi's first 4 out are Florida, NC State, Texas, Indiana, and Clemson. So 4 of those teams are I mean Florida, NC State, Texas, and Ohio State. So 2 of them have big games. Ohio State plays Indiana, which I think is an elimination game. I think the winner of that game is probably in the tournament. I think the loser is out, and I think that's the case in that game. I think you got NC State and Virginia. I think NC State is in the tournament right now. I think they're one of the first 4 teams in. I think they got in the tournament beating Clemson yesterday. That was a big win, coming back from behind to beat Clemson yesterday. I think they're in the tournament winning that game. I think you also got Texas, who I don't understand why Lunardi has them in the tournament. They're 16-15, but I think if they lose tonight, they're out of the tournament. There's no way they end up beating the tournament. And I think if Creighton wins today, they jump into the tournament, being the number 4 seed in the Big East. So I think Creighton jumps in if they win. You could make a case for Belmont. They had that great game with Murray State. Ja Morant was outstanding in that championship game. I watched that championship game. That was a really, really good small conference championship game. And then you look at another bubble team, Clemson. They're out after the loss yesterday. And then you look at one team with a very slim shot, and that's Georgetown. I think what Georgetown has to do is they beat Seton Hall. I think they need 2 wins. They need to beat Seton Hall and they need to beat Marquette in the Big East tournament. So we'll go to our conference tournament predictions, and we'll start with the ACC. And we'll start today with the first game. You got Virginia against NC State, and I think Virginia wins that game, moves on to the second round of the ACC tournament. I think that moves on to the semifinals of the ACC tournament. I think that you got a game between Virginia Tech and Florida State, and I think Florida State, without Robinson, Florida State, for Virginia Tech, I think Florida State beats Virginia Tech. I think that Louisville moves on. UNC moves on. They beat Louisville, and I think Duke with Zion Williamson back, which is big. That's going to be very, very interesting for Duke. It's going to be great to watch. It's now official. He's going to be back for the ACC tournament. I think it's going to be very fun to watch. I'm happy he's back. He's going to be playing in the NCAA tournament. Yes, he could have made a business decision, sat out the entire year, but he will play tonight. He is back for the ACC tournament. I think that is big for Duke, and they play Syracuse tonight, and I think they beat Syracuse. And in the semifinals of the tournament, I think that Virginia moves on, and I think that Duke moves on, and I think we're going to Duke Virginia 3 in the ACC final, and I think Duke does it again. You got those two All-Americans with R.J. Barrett and Zion Williamson. I think Duke wins the ACC tournament, but the ACC tournament is definitely going to be much better now that Zion Williamson is back. That is huge for the ACC tournament. It's going to be huge for the ratings of the ACC tournament, and that is big. It's now official. Zion Williamson will be back tonight against Syracuse at 9:00. That should be a really good game. That's Syracuse Duke 3. Yeah, Syracuse upset them in the first game at the Cameron Indoor. Duke beat them at the Carrier Dome. Now they'll play the rubber match in the ACC quarterfinals. So that should be a really good game. But I got Syracuse winning that game. We go over to the Big East tournament, and we are in the quarterfinal stage. You got Providence and Villanova. Yes, Villanova has struggled at home. On the road away from Villanova, but I think they win this game. I think Creighton beats Xavier. I think Marquette beats St. John's. I think St. John's is in the tournament. Their win last night over DePaul, I think, gets them into the tournament as a 10 or 11 seed. And I think Seton Hall beats Georgetown. I think that will eliminate Georgetown from the Big East tournament. Semifinals, I got Nova beating Creighton, but I still think Creighton ends up, if there aren't any bid stealers, they end up getting one of those spots in the NCAA tournament. I got we got Seton Hall beating Marquette, so I got a Seton Hall Villanova final, and I got Seton Hall winning in the rematch from last Saturday's game at Seton Hall. I got Seton Hall winning the Big East. Seton Hall winning the Big East. I think that Miles Powell will be too much for Villanova, and I think Seton Hall wins the Big East championship. So we go to the Big 12 championship, and we got the quarterfinals there tonight too. And we got the first game between Iowa State and Baylor. I think that's a really, really interesting game. But I think that Iowa State gets that win. I think they beat Baylor. I think you got TCU and Kansas State. I think TCU stamped their ticket to the tournament, winning last night. I think even it's gonna be a good game. Jamie Dixon against Bruce Weber, but I think without Dean Wade, that's going to make the difference without Dean Wade, I think they could still beat TCU, and I still think they move on to the next round. And I think they still move on to the next round and play Iowa State. We got Texas Tech and West Virginia, who upset Oklahoma, which could very easily hurt Oklahoma's NCAA tournament hopes. And I think that Texas Tech wins that game, and Texas and Kansas. Texas needs this win. I think if they lose this game, they're out. And I think even with all that's going on with Kansas, I think Kansas loses, and Kansas plays Texas Tech in the semis. I got in the semis, I still got K-State beating Iowa State without Dean Wade, and I got Texas Tech beating K-State, and then I got Texas Tech with Jarrett Culver, the Big 12 Player of the Year, winning the Big 12 tournament. We go on to the Big 10 tournament, and big game. We got a lot of big games today. We'll just predict. The first round. We'll just predict the Ohio State Indiana game, and I think I think that Indiana beats Ohio State. I think Romeo Langford is too much for Ohio State. And I think they win that game. As we move on to Friday, I think that Michigan State beats Ohio State, and they move to the semis. I think Maryland beats Nebraska, and then they beat Wisconsin. I think Anthony Cowan and Bruno Fernando are going to be too much for Ethan Happ, and I think it's Maryland and Wisconsin in the Big Ten semis. I think that Purdue beats either Penn State or Minnesota in the Big Ten in the Big Ten quarters, and I think Michigan beats either Iowa or Illinois in the Big Ten quarterfinals. So for the semifinals of the Big Ten, we got Michigan State and Michigan State and Maryland. I think Michigan State beats Maryland to go to the final. They got Nick Ward back, which is big for the tournament. And I think Purdue with Carson Edwards beats Michigan. So I think it's Purdue, Michigan State, and I think Michigan State wins the Big Ten title. We'll go on to the SEC tournament. And I think that Florida beats Alabama and gets into the NCAA tournament today. I think Auburn wins today. I think that the Florida beats Arkansas and gets into the tournament. I think Ole Miss beats Alabama, and I think that Mississippi State wins. So I think tomorrow that I think LSU wins. I think that Auburn wins, and I think that Kentucky beats Ole Miss, and Tennessee beats Mississippi State. So now we got the semifinals. I think LSU beats Auburn, and Tennessee beats Kentucky because I don't think Kentucky has Reed Travis. So I think for the final, I think Tennessee wins the SEC. Now we got the American Conference tournament, and UConn starts in about an hour, and they'll be playing. UConn will be playing South Florida. I think UConn wins this game. It's been a weird year for Danny Hurley. I think the team started off really good, then really struggled in conference play on the road. They ended up getting that win against ECU, so they didn't end up going winless on the road. But I think that it's been kind of a weird year for Danny Hurley and UConn. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to change the culture from Kevin Ollie. I think the culture has changed. I think they've been close in a lot of games. I think they've been competitive in a lot of games. Yes, the results aren't there. They end up the season 15-16, but they've had injuries. Altroy Gilbert was hurt. Jalen Adams was hurt. And I think that UConn, as much as a lot of people are upset with the record, I still think that there's hope with Danny Hurley, and I think that they definitely are going in the right direction. I think they beat UCF. I think they beat USF, but then they lose to Houston in the quarterfinals. I think UCF moves on to the semis. I think Cincinnati moves on to the semis. I think Temple moves on to the semis, and that Temple win in the quarter should get them into the NCAA tournament. And I think that UCF beats Houston in the semis. Cincinnati beats Temple in the Cincinnati beats Temple in the semis. So you got Cincy and UCF, and I think UCF wins. I think with Aubrey Dawkins, I think with BJ Taylor, I think with Taco Fall, I think this team upsets Houston, and I think they beat Cincinnati. Remember, they beat Houston a couple weeks ago in Houston. That was a huge win for them, and I think that they definitely can beat them, and they can beat Cincinnati, and this is a Cincinnati team. Jeff Cumberland's a good player, but they really are not. This is a Cincinnati team is not as good as they've been in previous years. I mean, I think they're definitely beatable, and I think the Cincinnati team is going to struggle. And the last tournament is the worst tournament in conference, in the worst conference in college basketball. That's the Pac-12. You really have two teams that really have much of a shot to do anything in the tournament, and they're in the quarterfinals right now. You got USC and Washington, I think, today, and I think Washington wins that. You got Colorado State and Oregon State, and I think Oregon State wins. You got UCLA, Arizona State, Arizona State wins. You got Oregon, Utah, and I think Oregon upsets them, even though they lost one of their best players during the season. And I think in the semis, you got Washington advance. You got Washington and pretty much Arizona State. You got Bobby Hurley's team, who's pretty much in the tournament now. Now you got Washington facing USC. So that should be when you got Washington facing Oregon State, and I think Washington wins that, and I think Washington ends up beating Arizona State to win the Pac-12 championship. So that's going to be a wrap on this week's show. We hope Justin D'Onofrio and Kyle Galuri are back next week. I am Steve Risser. We'll be back next week talking March Madness and a little bit more NFL free agency. Have a great weekend, everybody.